The first time I realized something was off was when my contractor called and said he couldn't get through my front gate. Said it was locked with a fresh padlock and a warning sign reading "Private HOA permit required." That was weird because it was my gate, my property. And I never gave anyone permission to touch it. I live in a small coastal neighborhood in California, tucked away from the touristy crowds. My name's Landon Keller, and I'm a retired maritime attorney. After decades of legal battles over coastal access rights, I bought this property for the very reason that it included the deeded rights to the entire stretch of beach in front of it. That's right, the whole damn coastline. It's private land, even though the HOA likes to pretend it has a say. The HOA president is a woman named Darlene Whitmore, mid-50s. Platinum blonde bob, the kind who shows up in your driveway uninvited, clutching a clipboard like it's a badge of honor. She's been on a power trip for years, but recently she got bold. Too bold. When I drove back from the hardware store and saw the new padlock on my own gate, I was already halfway to boiling. But it was the laminated sign that really did it. Beach access fees, $25 per guest. Payable to Seabreeze Estates, HOA. I stared at it, then looked over at the beach where 3 teenagers were being told by Darlene herself to pay up or leave. I parked, walked straight down the path and said, "Darlene, what the hell are you doing?" She barely looked at me, still pointing her finger at the kids. "This is HOA-managed Coastline, Landon. We've had too many outsiders lately. We're enforcing new access fees." I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so outrageously stupid. "You think the HOA manages this beach?" She finally turned to face me, nose slightly raised. "As president of the Seabreeze Estates HOA, I have the authority to implement emergency regulations for community safety." "Emergency regulations don't override property deeds," I said, stepping closer. "This beach is mine, Darlene. It's private land." "I have the original coastal grant and the county records to prove it," she scoffed. "We'll see what the board says." "Oh, I already know what they'll say," I told her calmly. "You've just locked me out of my own property and extorted money from people using land you don't own." "That's petty theft and trespassing." Darlene didn't back down. "I'll be bringing this up at Monday's hearing. You've been allowing unregistered guests onto HOA land for months." "Again, not HOA land," I said. "And good luck explaining to the county sheriff why you're collecting money with no permit or legal claim to the area." She waved me off like I was a nuisance. "Then call the sheriff." I did, right then and there, took out my phone and dialed. Darlene's face dropped a bit when she realized I was serious. When Deputy Rojas arrived 20 minutes later, I handed over the documents titled Deed, Land Survey, and the original 1978 coastal zoning exemption that granted my property exclusive rights to the beach and all access paths leading to it. Rojas read it carefully, then looked at Darlene. "Ma'am," he said, "did you install this lock?" "I had it installed on behalf of the HOA," she replied stiffly. "Do you or the HOA have any legal claim over this land?" She hesitated. "We manage the community perimeter." "That's not what I asked." She stayed silent. Rojas turned to me. "Mr. Keller, do you want to press charges for trespassing and property tampering?" "Not yet," I said. "But I want that lock off, right now," he nodded. "Ma'am, you'll need to remove the lock immediately, and you're not authorized to charge fees here." "That ends today." Darlene didn't say a word as she fumbled with her keys and removed the padlock. The teens she tried to charge were still nearby, watching everything. As she left, I heard her mutter, "This isn't over." She was right. It wasn't. Because I had a feeling this wasn't just about one lock or a few bucks. Something told me Darlene and the HOA had a bigger scheme brewing, and I wasn't about to let it slide. The next morning, I woke up to tire tracks across my driveway and a note stuck to my front door with painter's tape. Community violation. Unauthorized commercial use of property. No letterhead. Just the HOA's name typed in bold and at the bottom, Darlene's signature scrawled like a threat. I didn't even bother finishing my coffee. I grabbed the note and headed toward the HOA's so-called clubhouse, which was really just a converted garage at the end of Coralview Lane. I figured if Darlene wanted to play games, she could do it face to face. The garage door was open halfway, revealing a folding table covered in binders and 3 board members hunched over a laptop. Darlene was dictating something, her hand waving dramatically as if she were orchestrating a courtroom drama. "Your clubhouse is on city land," I said as I stepped under the door, raising the violation notice. "So technically, this setup is the only commercial use happening illegally in this neighborhood?" Darlene didn't even flinch. "You're not allowed in here without an appointment. This isn't a therapy office. I got this taped to my front door this morning." She took off her glasses slowly. "We've received multiple complaints that you're running a private business charging people to use the beach." I tilted my head. "That's rich, coming from someone who tried to charge teenagers $25 to walk on sand." "The board is investigating," said a man in a salmon-colored golf shirt. I think his name was Greg. He avoided eye contact, fiddling with a pen. "You don't have the authority to investigate private property," I said. "And unless someone's got a warrant or a court order, this little witch hunt ends now." Darlene stepped around the table. "You think you're untouchable because you've got an old deed and a law degree. But this community has structure, guidelines that don't supersede county zoning or property rights. That beach is part of Seabreeze's identity," she said, voice rising. "It brings in homebuyers, it's our image. You think you can just close it off and treat it like your backyard? You'd be amazed what the county lets me do with land I actually own." She narrowed her eyes, but I could see something else behind the glare, panic, not just anger, something deeper. Like she'd already pushed too far and knew it. I turned to leave but glanced back. "By the way, I'm pulling the security footage from my driveway. If I find out who parked on my property last night, I'll be pressing charges for trespassing. Just a heads up." That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office to pull every document related to Seabreeze Estates. I wasn't just looking for ammunition, I wanted to know how deep this went. If they were issuing fake violations and collecting unauthorized fees, there had to be a paper trail. I found something better. A zoning map from 1981 showing that the beach and access road were explicitly excluded from HOA management boundaries. Not just omitted, excluded. And worse for them, there was a clause in the original plat map that forbade the HOA from charging, limiting, or managing entry to the beachside easement, which covered not only my property but a 100-foot buffer zone that wrapped around it. I made 5 certified copies. When I returned home, a black SUV with tinted windows was parked across the street, engine running, no plates. I walked right up to it and knocked on the driver's window. The man inside didn't roll it down, didn't even blink, just drove off. That night, I called my friend Delia, who worked as an investigator for the state attorney's office. I told her the basics: unauthorized fees, locked gates, forged notices, and now an unmarked vehicle parked across from my house. She promised to run a background check on the HOA's business filings. 2 days later, she called back. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Seabreeze Estates HOA filed an amendment to their charter 3 months ago. It claims the beach access path is under their jurisdiction due to a community value adjustment, not a legal term, by the way, and they used that to apply for a small business grant from the state's Coastal Tourism Fund." "They applied for state money?" I asked. $35,000, she said, "and they got it." That's when it clicked. This wasn't about control, it was about cash. Darlene and her board weren't just trying to flex authority, they were trying to cash in on land they didn't own by pretending it belonged to the community. And now, they were on the hook for defrauding the state. I filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's public integrity unit, attaching every document I had. Delia forwarded the grant application, which included doctored maps and a forged letter of approval with a fake signature from a non-existent coastal liaison. Within 72 hours, An investigator named Marcus Chen showed up at my door with a badge and a folder full of subpoenas. "I need to know everything," he said as I walked him inside. "We've already frozen the HOA's grant account. But if this goes deeper, we'll need to interview residents." As I handed over the zoning maps and access easement plat, I asked him, "What happens if the board misused state funds?" "If it's proven," Marcus said, "we're looking at felony fraud, falsified public documents, and potentially conspiracy charges. Anyone who signed that application could be criminally liable." He left with a box of evidence and a list of residents I knew had been pressured or fined by the HOA in the past year. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast. Someone had seen Marcus leaving my place with files. Darlene's garage office was closed, the door padlocked from the outside. And Greg, the guy with the salmon shirt, was seen hauling a shredder out to his SUV before speeding off. I hosted a private meeting at my house with 10 longtime residents. Most had been hit with bogus citations, forced to pay fees for repainting mailboxes, trimming hedges, or using the community pool during non-designated hours. Some had receipts. Others had been too afraid to push back. One woman, Teresa, showed me a letter Darlene sent her last month demanding a community property tax adjustment fee of $700 completely fabricated. Another resident, Jorge, had surveillance footage of HOA board members walking onto his side yard and photographing his garden beds at night. I handed everything to Marcus. By the end of the week, subpoenas were served to every board member. Darlene was the last to be visited. She wasn't home, but her Mercedes was towed from the street after DMV found it registered under the HOA's name, not hers bought using part of the grant money. That Sunday, I walked down to the beach with a small group of neighbors. We set up chairs, opened a cooler, and watched the tide roll in. No signs, no locks, no clipboard-toting tyrants, just the sound of waves and a community finally realizing they didn't have to be afraid. And as the sun dipped low over the horizon, a young couple walked up the path, hesitating like they expected someone to yell at them. "Don't worry," I told them. "You're welcome here. This is exactly where you belong." 2 weeks after the subpoenas dropped, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically same trimmed hedges, same pastel stucco homes, but the energy had shifted. People strolled through the streets without glancing over their shoulders, without checking their mailboxes, afraid of another fine. Even the air felt lighter, like the tension had finally thinned. I had spent the past few days cataloging files, organizing testimonies, and forwarding everything to Marcus from the DA's Public Integrity Unit. My living room had become an unofficial war room. Maps, affidavits, and old HOA newsletters covered the table. Each document pointed to one thing: this wasn't just a power trip, it was a coordinated scheme. That morning, I received a call from Detective Aaron Halstead with the Financial Crimes Division. Calm voice, clipped sentences. She'd been looped in after the DA began cross-referencing the HOA's grant application with state disbursement records. Turns out the $35,000 wasn't the only pot of money Seabreeze Estates had dipped into. "We've traced 3 separate disbursements under different names," she said. "All tied to your HOA's tax ID, 2 from the state's Environmental Beautification Fund, 1 from the Federal Coastal Resilience Initiative." "That's federal money," I said. "Exactly, which means we're involving the U.S. Attorney's Office." I leaned back in my chair, absorbing that. "So what's the total?" "Just under $112,000, she said. "All received over the past 8 months. We believe they used falsified community impact statements and doctored photos to secure the grants. One of the applications even listed a non-existent marine biology partnership." "And let me guess," I said, "they reported my beach as part of their conservation zone." Bingo. By noon, 4 unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Agents in windbreakers stepped out, fanning across the cul-de-sacs like a synchronized sweep. One headed straight for Darlene's house. Another knocked on Greg's door. A third parked in front of the clubhouse garage. I stayed on my porch, coffee in hand, watching it unfold. The agents didn't make a scene, no sirens, no shouting, just quiet authority. But the message was loud enough. Residents peeked from behind curtains. One man dropped his rake and stood frozen in his yard. A teenager filming from his phone whispered, "No way." An hour later, Darlene was escorted out in a navy tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, expression blank, wrists cinched behind her. Greg followed soon after, still wearing that same salmon golf shirt from the HOA's last meeting. His face was pale, jaw slack. That evening, Detective Halstead called again. "We've got enough to indict all 5 board members: wire fraud, misuse of public funds, false statements, conspiracy, and we may uncover more. They'll be prosecuted federally. Some charges, yes," she said. "But we're coordinating with county prosecutors too. The local violations, like your property being tampered with, are being handled separately." I hesitated. "What about the residents who were fined illegally?" "People who paid hundreds for fake violations. We'll be recommending restitution," she said. "But you may want to consider a civil suit. Class action could be effective here." I didn't respond right away. I was already thinking about the neighbor's Teresa, Jorge, the single dad who'd been fined for excessive toy storage on his front porch. This wasn't just about me anymore. The next morning, I printed out flyers and walked door to door, not to stir panic, just to inform. Community Legal Assembly, the flyer read. Saturday, 4 p.m., hosted at Keller Residence. Open to all Seabreeze Estates residents impacted by HOA actions. By Friday, word had spread. People I'd never spoken to before waved at me from their yards. One man, a retired mechanic named Vince, walked over and handed me a flash drive. "I've got audio recordings," he said. "Board meetings from last fall." They didn't know I was mic'd. Anything useful? Depends how you feel about them, admitting they fabricated landscaping fees to keep the riffraff out. Saturday arrived with a strange kind of energy. The meeting started with folding chairs, lemonade, and cautious voices. But once the stories started flowing, caution turned into fire. A widowed school counselor had been threatened with foreclosure over a $500 emergency irrigation levy. A family who fostered dogs had been told to remove a wheelchair ramp because it violated elevation uniformity. A carpenter was fined for repainting his porch in a shade of gray, too urban. I introduced them to attorney Kendra Ng, a colleague from my maritime law days who now specialized in property rights and HOA abuse. She'd driven in from Sacramento, intrigued by the case and ready to help. "I've worked on cases involving displacement, zoning fraud, and HOA embezzlement," she said to the group. "But I've never seen anything this coordinated across state and federal lines." Jorge asked her, "Can we get our money back? If we file as a collective," she said, "we can pursue damages. Real ones. Not just the fees you paid, but the costs of stress, lost property value, emotional distress. We'll go after everything." People started signing her intake forms like they were signing a Declaration of Independence. After the meeting, Kendra pulled me aside. "They're scared, but they're ready. Darlene and her cronies wanted people to feel isolated," I said. "We're showing them they're not," she nodded. "You ever think about running for the new board?" I thought the HOA would collapse. It won't. It'll restructure, and someone's going to have to lead it. I didn't answer then. I just looked out to the ocean, waves catching the sun in long golden lines. The next week, the county held a public forum on HOA accountability. The auditorium was packed. Residents from other neighborhoods came too, sharing their stories. A small business owner described being fined $300 for hanging a pride flag. An elderly couple had been told to remove solar panels because they altered the street view aesthetic. When the microphone came to me, I kept it simple. "They locked my gate," I said. "Charged strangers to walk on my beach. Lied to the government. Lied to you. But they didn't count on one thing: that we'd talk to each other, that we'd share notes, that we'd fight back. Applause erupted loud, unrestrained, rising like a wave. After the forum, the county commissioner approached. "We're drafting new legislation," she said, "stripping HOAs of certain enforcement powers and requiring annual audits for any that collect fees over $20,000 a year." "About time," I said. Back home, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not a fine, not a threat. A handwritten note from a teenage girl who'd been one of the first kids Darlene tried to charge that day. "Thanks for standing up for us," it read. "I never thought grown-ups would care." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer next to the deed and the original coastal exemption. Proof that truth still had a place in this world. That no matter how loud the clipboard tyrants shouted, justice could still speak louder. And for the first time in a long while, I stepped onto my beach not as a target, but as the man who showed the community they could take it back. The Friday after the indictments, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of an internal HOA memo marked confidential, dated 6 months earlier. At the top in bold were the words, "Phase Roman II Coastal Monetization Strategy." I read it twice. The memo outlined a plan to reclassify the beach and surrounding parcels as a shared amenity to justify quarterly assessments, followed by a long-term goal to lease access rights to a third-party hospitality vendor. In plain English, they were planning to sell access to my land to a private resort company. I scanned the bottom 2 signatures, Darlene Whitmore and someone named Nolan Pierce, the former treasurer. This wasn't just fraud. This was attempted theft of private land on a commercial scale. I forwarded a scan of the memo to Detective Halstead and attached a note. "Looks like this rabbit hole goes deeper," she called within the hour. "We've been looking for a smoking gun," she said. "This is it." If they moved forward with monetizing land outside their jurisdiction, that's attempted land conversion. That's a felony. "Where's Nolan Pierce now?" I asked. "According to his subpoena, he left the state last week, but we're issuing a bench warrant." "He won't get far." That evening, I met Kendra at the county records office. She tracked down a set of transaction logs from the HOA's operating account records they never expected any homeowner to see. One entry stood out. Consulting fee Bayline Group LLC, $12,000. Bayline Group specialized in private resort development. I knew because I'd litigated a case against one of their subsidiaries years ago. They had a reputation for targeting vulnerable coastal communities and acquiring access rights through shell LLCs. They were planning to convert the beach into a private events venue, Kendra said, flipping through the documents. Weddings, corporate retreats, VIP access passes. They even drafted a limited access tier for residents who paid the highest HOA dues. And they thought they could do all this without owning the land, I said. Not just thought, they banked on no one checking. I looked through the records again. One invoice, dated 2 months earlier, was for a drone survey of the coastal area. Another for event space staging consultation. They were preparing to build on land that legally wasn't theirs. We brought everything to Marcus Chen. He added it to the evidence list and put in a request for a financial forensics team to audit HOA transactions going back 5 years. 2 days later, they found over $70,000 in unaccounted withdrawals, all marked under vague entries like community upgrades or safety initiatives. But there were no upgrades, no projects, just a trail of disappearing funds and growing arrogance. That Monday, a quiet but critical hearing was held in the county courthouse. The judge reviewed all submitted evidence, fake violations, forged grant applications, the memo, financial records, and resident testimonies. No defense attorney dared to challenge the zoning maps Kendra submitted. The judge's ruling was swift. Effective immediately, the Seabreeze Estates HOA is suspended from all administrative functions pending full dissolution and criminal adjudication. A receiver will be appointed to manage community upkeep until a new governance structure is lawfully established. It was over. Outside the courtroom, a group of residents gathered, some crying, others laughing in disbelief. Vince, the retired mechanic, walked up and clapped me on the shoulder. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said. "They had us all afraid to speak." "They only win when people stay quiet," I said. That night I walked the beach alone. No signs, no fences, no gate locks or laminated threats, just the hush of the surf and the wind moving through the dunes. For the first time in months, I felt the silence wasn't hiding anything. The next morning, the local news vans showed up. Not for spectacle, but to cover the county's announcement of a new oversight committee for private communities. The commissioner herself read the statement. "We've learned that unchecked authority in residential associations can lead to abuse, fraud, and intimidation. Today, we begin rebuilding trust." A week later, I was asked to speak at the town's annual civic forum. I kept it brief. If you want to lead a community, serve it. If you want power, earn it. And if you ever find yourself locking someone out of land they rightfully own, ask yourself, what are you really protecting? 3 months passed. The federal trial moved forward. Darlene pled guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy to commit land conversion. Greg and the others followed, hoping for lighter sentences. Nolan Pierce was found in a short-term rental in Arizona, extradited, and charged with orchestrating the monetization scheme. The class action suit Kendra filed resulted in a settlement exceeding $400,000 to be distributed among affected residents. The funds came from the seizure of assets the former board members had tried to stash in unrelated accounts: cars, investment portfolios, even a boat registered under Darlene's nephew's name. As for the HOA itself, it was officially disbanded. In its place, a new resident-led council formed, this time with strict bylaws, annual audits, and zero enforcement authority without community votes. For the first time, it felt like a neighborhood instead of a dictatorship. One afternoon, as I was pulling weeds along the edge of the path leading to the beach, a young couple stopped to say hello. They just moved in with their newborn and had heard the story from the neighbors. They asked if it was true about the gate, the beach, the fraud. I nodded. It all happened, and we stopped it before it changed everything. The man looked out toward the ocean. Hard to believe something this peaceful was the center of all that. It's always the quiet places that greedy people want control over, I said, but peace isn't something you find. It's something you defend. That evening, the community held a gathering on the beach. No speeches, no agendas, just music, grilled food, and people finally comfortable enough to laugh together. Children ran barefoot across the sand. Someone lit a small bonfire. At one point, someone asked me if I was going to run for the new council. I said no. I'd fought my fight. It was time for new voices to lead. Later, as the last streaks of gold faded from the sky, I walked to the bluff above the dunes. The wind carried the sound of laughter, distant and bright. I took out the original deed, now laminated, and slid it into the mailbox outside the new community office with a note taped to the front. Let this never be forgotten, because power unchecked will always try to grow roots where it doesn't belong. But now, this place belonged to the people who lived here. And no one, no board, no clipboard tyrant, no shell company would ever take it from them again.